The emergency room had seen explosions, shootings, and impossible miracles, but nothing prepared the staff for the moment a wounded Navy SEAL was rushed through the sliding doors with half the hospital following behind. Blood soaked the stretcher. His pulse faded between frantic alarms. 4 armed escorts surrounded him while a massive military K9 snarled at anyone who stepped too close. Every second felt heavier than the last. A young nurse stepped forward without hesitation. Her name tag read Emma Carter. Fresh transfer. Temporary assignment. The exhausted charge physician glanced at her and frowned. "Not you," he snapped. "Call someone experienced." Several nurses exchanged uncomfortable looks. One whispered, "She's barely been here a week." Another muttered, "She'll freeze." Emma quietly reached for a pair of gloves. The CL opened his eyes just enough to see her face before coughing blood. His voice was rough but unmistakably firm. "I said, someone experienced." Those words struck harder than the shouting around her. She simply nodded. "I understand." She stepped aside without arguing while senior doctors crowded the stretcher. The trauma team began issuing overlapping orders, but confusion spread almost immediately. The patient's blood pressure crashed. Internal bleeding accelerated. The K9 barked violently, forcing security backward. Even the armed escorts looked uncertain. The emergency room transformed into controlled chaos. Emma watched silently, studying every monitor, every wound, every decision. Then she noticed something everyone else had missed. A small puncture beneath the CL's shoulder plate. Not a bullet exit. Something worse. The bleeding pattern made no sense unless a fragment had traveled upward before tearing a major vessel. She spoke carefully. "Doctor, the injury isn't where you think it is." Without looking at her, he waved dismissively. "Stay in your lane." Seconds later the monitor screamed, "Flatline." The room froze. The lead surgeon cursed under his breath. "We're losing him." The K9 suddenly broke free from its handler and stood directly in front of Emma instead of attacking. The enormous dog stared into her eyes, then lowered its head as though recognizing someone it had trusted long ago. Everyone stared. Emma slowly rolled back her sleeve. On her forearm rested an old military tattoo. Not decorative, not ordinary. The insignia belonged to an elite special operations medical unit so secret that only a handful of people in the room recognized it. One of the armed escorts turned pale. His rifle slipped slightly as he whispered, "That's impossible." The wounded SEAL forced his fading eyes open again. This time, instead of doubt, shock crossed his face. The room fell silent except for the relentless tone of the cardiac monitor. Every pair of eyes shifted between Emma's tattoo and the dying CL. The escort who had recognized the insignia stepped closer, disbelief etched across his face. "I served alongside that unit," he whispered. "No one outside command was ever allowed to wear that mark." Emma met his gaze without pride or hesitation. "I didn't wear it," she replied calmly. "I earned it." The lead surgeon scoffed despite the growing uncertainty. "This isn't the time for stories. Start another round of compressions." Emma looked at the monitor, then at the tiny wound beneath the shoulder. "You're compressing a heart that can't fill. The fragment has torn the subclavian artery. Opening his chest won't save him. No temporary nurse is going to lecture me," the surgeon barked. Before anyone could answer, the CL's oxygen level plummeted again. His skin turned pale and blood flooded the dressings faster than the nurses could replace them. The K9 began barking furiously, blocking anyone from moving the stretcher. It stood beside Emma, refusing to leave her side. Even the handler couldn't pull the dog away. One of the escorts finally stepped forward. "Doctor, if she's wrong, we lose a minute. If she's right, we lose a man." The surgeon hesitated. Emma didn't wait. She pointed toward an emergency ultrasound. "Scan here." The technician obeyed. Within seconds the screen revealed exactly what Emma had predicted. A jagged piece of metal had pierced the artery and lodged behind the collarbone, creating a hidden internal bleed. The room went silent. The surgeon stared at the image, then at Emma. How did you know?" "I've seen this injury before," she answered. "Twice, both on the same battlefield." Without another word, she guided the team through a rapid sequence of procedures. Every instruction was precise. Every movement anticipated the next complication before it appeared. The bleeding slowed. A faint heartbeat returned. Then another. The flatline became a fragile rhythm. Relief swept across the room, but Emma's expression never changed. "Don't celebrate yet," she warned. "His lungs are filling. We have less than 3 minutes." As the team prepared for the next procedure, the wounded SEAL slowly reached toward her sleeve. His trembling fingers touched the faded tattoo. "I remember that mark," he whispered. "Only one commander wore it into the mountains, and everyone believed she never came back." Emma lowered her eyes for a brief moment. "I wasn't supposed to." The realization struck the escorts all at once. The nurse they had dismissed wasn't simply experienced. She had once commanded the very unit that trained the man whose life she was now fighting to save. No one spoke as the truth settled over the emergency room. The surgeon who had dismissed Emma lowered his eyes, unable to hide his regret. Moments earlier she had been treated like an inexperienced temporary nurse. Now every person in the room understood they were standing beside a legend who had chosen silence over recognition. Emma ignored the stunned expressions and focused entirely on her patient. "Chest tube now," she ordered. "Prepare blood. Keep his pressure above 65. We only get one chance." This time, no one questioned her. The procedure began with perfect coordination. The canine finally relaxed, lying beside the stretcher with its eyes fixed on the CL's face. As the pressure inside his chest eased, his breathing became steadier. The monitors that had screamed moments before settled into a strong, steady rhythm. The danger, however, was not over. The fragment remained dangerously close to a major nerve. Removing it carelessly could leave the seal permanently paralyzed. Emma studied the scans for only a few seconds before making her decision. "We do it here," she said. The surgeon stared at her, without waiting for another specialist. "We don't have that luxury." A trusted replaced pride. He nodded. Working together, they performed the delicate procedure while the entire trauma team watched in complete silence. Every movement demanded absolute precision. Finally, Emma grasped the twisted piece of metal with surgical forceps and slowly lifted it free. For one terrifying heartbeat, the monitor hesitated. Then the CL's pulse grew stronger than anyone had expected. Applause almost erupted, but Emma simply closed her eyes in quiet relief. Several hours later, the seal awakened in intensive care. He looked around until he found Emma preparing to leave unnoticed. "Commander," he called softly. She stopped. "I resigned that title years ago." He smiled weakly. "Titles don't disappear because uniforms do." The surgeon stepped forward, his voice heavy with humility. "I told them to call someone experienced. I never imagined the most experienced person in the hospital was already standing in front of me. I'm sorry." Emma accepted the apology with a gentle smile. The mission was never about proving who was right. It was about making sure he lived. The K9 walked to her side one last time, gently resting its head against her hand before returning to its partner. Even the loyal dog understood that courage never needed applause. As Emma disappeared down the hallway, no cameras followed her, no reporters waited outside, and no medals were handed out. Yet every doctor, nurse, soldier, and patient who witnessed that unforgettable night carried the same lesson forever. Never judge someone's ability by their title, appearance, or silence, because the greatest heroes often choose humility over recognition. If this story reminded you that true greatness is revealed through actions, not words, subscribe for more unforgettable stories of courage, sacrifice, and hope that prove real heroes can be found where we least expect them.